out anytime from 1893 to 1924. There would have been a wooden white church here called the St. Joachim Church. Nowadays, you're looking at the St. George Convent in front of you, and then right behind it, the St. George Grammar School. They were put up in place of that building that would have been taken down in 1924. And so, that building was a church. Now, the only way you can think about what it looks like is I have a picture of it on my webpage, and you can thus picture it on this Maple Street for yourself. So we're in Chicopee, Massachusetts, in the St. George Church campus for the second stop. The first stop was the modern stop in the last 100 years. Then we got to figure out where all the old stuff is. So convent, rectory, church, Baptist chapel, and a school. So we'll take a view of the gorgeous 1924 church. It's turning 100 years old this year. It's now the St. Mary's Prayer Center, which is a wonderful job for it to have. And it was a French-Canadian church, and we talked about it so much. Now we're going to have one little thing I'll point out back here. There's a carriage house back here. This is actually a very old carriage house, this white building. And it doesn't look like a carriage house and doesn't look old. It might have aluminum siding on it. And it is from 1894. It was built as a carriage house for the brick house that's in front of it. And we're going to walk there. And we're going to point out. So it might look now like a carriage house, but it's a very old one like that. Now it's the rector's garage. Okay, now what we're looking at is the side of a former building that belonged to the St. Joachim Church. And we want to talk about its history too. Okay, and what we're going to do is pause it now, and we can get a good view for you because we need to see two buildings. Okay, so now we're in the front of the old rectory for the St. Joachim Church. It's called the Mary's House of Prayer now, and that's a good name, like the church itself. Now, what is the history of this? This whole building was made in the 1840s by a businessman called Pliny Cadwell, and he was a merchant out of Chicopee. And then for a while, Alfred Ruthvenels owned it in the 1880s and early 1890s. In 1895, it became the rectory. And he had to have that in a few years that he owned it. He built that carriage house that I pointed out to you. Right? So he did some work on it and fixed it up. So it needs a little work, this house. There's 4 columns on the very front. There's 2 columns on each side, so that's called a total of 8 columns. And so it's a neoclassical building. Now, if you look at the years that I mentioned, 1893, the parish started with a wooden church as a church. They put that one up on Maple Street. We showed you where it was. Now, 1893, but I said this became the rectory in 1895. So what's going on here? For 2 years, you have a church, but you need a rectory. So, believe it or not, if you look one house more beyond what's now the St. Mary's House of Prayer, the former rectory, you see another White House, right? And that White House is very important because that's a James Bly house, right? And it was sold to the church in 1893, and that was the first rectory for 2 years. But not only that, and this is the incredible part. They bought it in 1893. It was the rectory on the 2nd floor only. But on the ground floor, the wooden church on Maple Street that served as parish for a long time, up to 1924, that wasn't ready until 1896 and 1970. So for 4 years, the ground floor was the church. So a person's house, and is now back to being a house, had changed into a church and a rectory. And now, think about this. One more step. Where, after the rectory era becomes a rectory, and that church is not needed from 1895 or 6 onwards, what is that? How happens to that building? Well, there's no convent yet, because the first convent was from 1927, right? So for 34 years, where's the convent? It was, after the rector or the priest left, it was in there. So that was a church, a rectory, a convent, and not only that, where's the first school? Well, the first school wasn't built until much later. In fact, they used the old wooden church for a while, and then they had their own separate church. But for a few years, that was also the school. So all 4 components were inside that building at different times. Okay, so that building is actually very historic as far as the St. Joachim, St. George parish is concerned. So I'm glad you got to learn about it. Now, the neighborhood is very nice, and we're going to sweep around in a 180 to get a sense of what this looks like, right? Seeing all components, you can see the school, convent, rectory, old building that was all 4, and then the modern St. George. The only thing you can't see anymore is the wooden St. George. So thank you very much for coming here.